Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepless Scientist, a quiet place in the cosmos where your thoughts can unwind and knowledge becomes a soft lullaby for the night. Tonight's journey will take us inward, not through galaxies or distant stars, but into the hidden worlds that bloom behind closed eyes. We'll drift together through the realm of dreams, lucid, strange, and sometimes haunting, and meet the mysterious figure said to have appeared in the sleep of thousands around the world. Before we settle in, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe, only if you truly find these calm explorations soothing. And when you're ready, tell me in the comments where in the world you're listening from, and what time it is for you right now. It's always a quiet joy to see how far our little constellation of listeners reaches. Now, feel free to dim the lights. Maybe let a soft fan hum in the background and allow your thoughts to drift wherever they wish. If your mind begins to wander, that's perfectly fine. It's only practicing the gentle art of dreaming. As daylight retreats and the mind begins its quiet descent, something remarkable unfolds. The body cools by a degree or two. The pulse slows as though listening for silence. The world outside blurs, and what's left is the soft echo of yourself. Falling asleep is not a sudden plunge, but a gentle slope. A shoreline where waking thoughts dissolve into waves of twilight. At first, you hover in a half-dream, that drowsy prelude where the mind begins to paint with half-open eyes. It's here that fleeting images appear, a hallway you've never walked, a voice calling your name from no direction at all. Scientists might label this as light sleep, but to the dreamer, it feels like slipping through gauze between one breath and the next. Beneath the skin, slow currents of electricity begin to change their rhythm. Brain waves, once brisk and sharp during the day, soften into wider, slower arcs, gentle swells that roll like tides across the mind's surface. If you could listen to them, they'd sound almost like the rhythm of distant waves. These slow patterns are the language of rest, the body's way of saying, we're safe enough to drift now. As you sink deeper, awareness ebbs. The mind starts to wander without direction, and the self, that little voice narrating everything, falls quiet. Muscles slacken, the outer world fades. It's a kind of surrender, but a peaceful one. Imagine standing in a forest as fog rolls in. You can no longer see where the path leads, but you trust that the ground is still beneath your feet. In the deeper layers of sleep, the body repairs itself. Cells patch their tiny worn places, the heart rehearses its rhythm, the lungs slow their song. This is the stage where time begins to dissolve. A few minutes or an hour, they feel the same in this dark water. If someone were to wake you here, you'd rise slowly, carrying pieces of dreams that vanish as you open your eyes, like snowflakes melting on warm skin. But the night is patient, and the mind is rhythmic. After the deep stillness comes a stirring, a moment when the eyes beneath your lids begin to flutter, tiny movements tracing invisible scenes. This is the moment the inner cinema begins. Your body lies perfectly still, held gently in a kind of paralysis so it won't act out its imagined adventures, while the mind switches on its most vivid projector. Faces, places, fragments of old memories, they weave together with perfect confidence, even when nothing makes sense. We call this stage the dreaming stage, the place where the mind rehearses life through symbols and stories. You're not just resting here. You're performing, rewriting, and remembering in ways you never could while awake. Scientists can measure the electrical rhythm of this dream state, but they cannot pin down its purpose. To the dreamer, purpose doesn't matter. All that matters is that the story plays on, endlessly creative, endlessly strange. As the hours pass, this dance between deep rest and dreaming repeats in cycles, each one longer, more vivid, more emotional than the last. In the first cycle, dreams may last only a few minutes. By the fifth, just before dawn, they can feel endless. Perhaps that's why we so often wake with the sense of having lived a whole lifetime in the space between alarms. Dreams are not interruptions of sleep, they are its language. Each night, while you rest, the brain performs a secret symphony, slow movements for repair, faster ones for imagination. You wake refreshed not because you escaped from this inner world, but because you've been rebuilt inside it. Sleep is the body's workshop, but dreaming is its song. And if we listen closely to that song, we begin to notice it has patterns, familiar chords that return, emotions that hum through every verse. As we drift further into the story, we'll explore how these nightly compositions repeat, evolve, and whisper truths we barely notice by day. Sleep is not a single, endless descent into darkness. It is rhythmic, cyclical, like the tides or the beating of a hidden drum. Each night, your mind performs this quiet symphony, drifting down into silence, then rising again toward dreams, repeating again and again until dawn. If you could chart it on a graph, it might look like the gentle rolling of waves, but since we cannot see sleep, we live it instead. You might not remember each movement, but your body does. It hums along with this silent orchestra every night, perfectly in tune. After the first descent into deep sleep, the body begins to stir ever so slightly. Breathing becomes lighter, and the eyes, though closed, begin to flicker, tracing invisible scenes. This is the dreaming stage, the place where your brain begins to tell stories to itself. Scientists once thought dreaming was chaotic, a meaningless byproduct of the brain's nightly repairs. But now many suspect it serves a purpose, or perhaps many small, beautiful purposes all at once. It's here, in this fragile moment, that memory and imagination waltz together. The brain replays fragments of the day, a sound, a scent, a fleeting worry, and blends them with images from deeper storage. Your mind is editing and composing all at once, creating a film stitched from memories you didn't know you kept. You might appear in these dreams as yourself, or as someone else entirely. You may walk through your childhood home, but the walls shimmer into a forest. The forest becomes a city. The city becomes a hallway that leads nowhere at all. Each cycle through the night deepens this process. The first is short, only a few minutes of dreaming before the body returns to deeper rest. But as the night stretches on, dreams become longer, richer, more emotional. By the time the first light begins to brush the window, your brain has looped through this symphony 4 or 5 times, each movement building upon the last. Like a piece of music revisiting its theme, your dreams often echo one another, though you might never notice. A melody of fear, of curiosity, of longing, repeated in variations until the morning overture plays and you wake. Some neuroscientists describe this as the brain's nightly rehearsal. During the day, you're bombarded with noise, conversations, screens, small worries, endless tasks. The mind has no time to sort through what matters and what doesn't, but at night, freed from all that noise, it finally begins to file things away. Like a librarian restoring order to a cluttered shelf, it decides what to keep, what to discard, and what to link with something else entirely. A stray remark from a friend may attach itself to a memory from childhood. A song heard at breakfast may weave into a dream about flying. Nothing is wasted. Everything is rewritten. Even emotion has its rhythm here. Studies suggest that the most active part of your sleeping brain is the one that feels, the amygdala, the small almond-shaped structure that lights up when you're afraid, hopeful, or in love. It remains awake even while reason sleeps, playing its music softly through your dreams. That's why so many of them pulse with feeling, anxiety, tenderness, guilt, relief. These emotional rehearsals help you face those same feelings when you wake. You might not remember the dream, but you often wake lighter, as if some burden had been rearranged in the night. If we could translate the electrical language of sleep, it might sound like this. a slow drumbeat of deep waves, followed by a sudden high trill of rapid eye movement, a burst of story, colour and motion. Then silence again, deep rest, then another dream. The alternation repeats, each turn building upon the one before, until your body and mind agree that enough has been repaired, enough has been imagined. It is a process so ancient and automatic that even the smallest animals share it. Birds dream of flying, cats twitch through imagined hunts, dolphins rest half their brains at a time, one hemisphere dreaming while the other keeps them afloat. We might think of dreaming as the mind's private language, one that translates emotion into metaphor, but it also speaks in rhythm. Just as the heart keeps time for the body, the cycles of dreaming keep time for the mind. Miss a night of sleep, and it feels as though the inner orchestra lost its conductor. Too many sleepless nights, and even waking life begins to sound dissonant. It is only when we allow the full concert to play, from the quietest cello of deep rest to the bright violin of dreaming, that our inner harmony is restored. Sometimes, in those last cycles before dawn, dreams become extraordinarily vivid. Faces of people long gone may appear, not as memories, but as living presences. Voices you haven't heard in years speak again. There's a reason many people wake from these late morning dreams feeling that they've glimpsed something important, something sacred. It isn't magic, it's simply the moment when your conscious mind begins to surface, catching the end of a story your subconscious has been telling all night. It's like arriving at the final scene of a movie you didn't realize you were watching. Dreaming doesn't just rest the brain, it refreshes the self. Every night you leave behind the clutter of daily identity and return wearing 1,000 masks. You're a child again, or an explorer, or simply a floating observer drifting above oceans of light. When you wake, these roles dissolve, but they leave behind a faint aftertaste, the same way a melody hums in your mind after it ends. That lingering hum is why dreams matter. They remind us that imagination is not limited to daylight. If we follow the thread a little further, we'll see that these nightly stories are more than random images. They are experiments, simulations that prepare us for challenges, and sometimes reflections that help us mend. Dreams are how the mind teaches itself what it already knows, in a language made of symbols instead of words. And in the next step of our journey, we'll watch that quiet librarian at work, sorting, editing, and weaving memory into meaning while you sleep. Imagine your mind as a quiet library that never closes. Each day you wander through its aisles, gathering books and papers, moments and impressions. By nightfall, the shelves are overflowing. A conversation here, a sound there, a brief spark of laughter or embarrassment. When you finally close your eyes, the librarian of the mind begins to work. It moves softly through the dim corridors, deciding what to keep, what to let go, and what belongs together. You are asleep, but inside that hidden library, every thought and feeling is being shelved in its proper place. Dreaming is part of this gentle maintenance. Scientists once called it memory consolidation, but that phrase doesn't quite capture the quiet poetry of what's happening. The mind is not just storing information, it's rearranging the story of who you are. Memories arrive mixed with emotion, so the librarian has to decide how to file them. A kind word might be placed beside a long-forgotten sadness. A small mistake may be folded into a larger lesson. These aren't numbers or formulas. They're the delicate threads of experience being rewoven into something more coherent. During the day, the brain is a crowded market. Sights, sounds, and thoughts, all competing for attention. At night, it becomes still. And in that stillness, connections emerge that daylight never had time to build. The mind begins to sort and summarize, turning moments into meaning. You might not remember your dreams, but the work they do remains. It's the reason you sometimes wake with clarity about something that felt confusing before. The dream, even forgotten, has rearranged your shelves. If we could translate the biology into something visual, it might look like this. Imagine rows of lanterns flickering across a dark field. Each lantern represents a memory, glowing faintly on its own. As you sleep, invisible hands move through the field, adjusting the lanterns, grouping some together, letting others fade. By morning, the arrangement has changed. Some lights burn brighter, some are gone, and new paths of light stretch between them. That is memory being made, not by effort, but by rest. Some of the brain's most devoted caretakers are at work here. Regions like the hippocampus, which acts as a kind of cartographer, mapping where experiences belong. But instead of speaking in anatomical terms, think of it as a storyteller taking notes, drawing lines between the characters and events of your life. When you dream, that storyteller is free to rewrite scenes. A person you met years ago might walk through a room from yesterday. A moment of failure might be turned into something humorous. In that freedom to mix and rearrange, the brain finds balance. It's a quiet therapy session conducted by your own imagination. Dreams don't simply repeat what happened, they interpret it. A worry might appear as a storm that won't pass. A long drive might become a journey through endless hallways. These metaphors are the brain's way of digesting what can't easily be said in words. Even animals do this in their own way. The sleeping cat twitching as it replays the hunt, the bird murmuring softly as its brain practices the patterns of its song. The rehearsal is universal, as if all living things must occasionally dream to stay alive. If you've ever gone to bed with a problem and woken up with the answer, you've experienced this process at work. During dreaming, logic loosens its grip, and creativity takes its place. The mind tests new combinations, exploring without fear of consequence. It can try 1,000 paths in a single night, unconstrained by the boundaries of the waking world. Artists and scientists have long spoken of ideas that arrived in dreams, but what they're really describing is this: the librarian experimenting, shuffling thoughts into new alignments until something suddenly fits. And yet much of this work goes unnoticed. You wake, stretch, perhaps remember a fragment, a staircase, a name, a strange sense of déjà vu, and then it vanishes. The librarian does not ask for thanks. It only asks that you rest long enough for it to finish the catalogue. The cost of skipping that rest is steep. Memories remain unsorted, emotions stay raw, and concentration begins to fray. Sleep deprivation isn't just fatigue. It's the mind trapped in a messy room it never had time to clean. Inside this nightly housekeeping lies another miracle: the soft blending of memory and imagination. When you dream of someone long gone, your brain is doing more than remembering. It's gently keeping them alive, reassembling their voice, their smile, their scent from the fragile materials of the past. This isn't fantasy. It's the emotional truth of memory being practiced, reinforced, and soothed. Even grief is a form of remembering, and dreams give it room to breathe. The same is true for learning. When you study, practice a skill, or even rehearse a musical piece, the performance continues while you sleep. The librarian reviews your notes, rewinds the memory, and strengthens the neural paths that hold it. You might say the mind plays back its own lessons, repeating them in whispers until they stick. That's why sleep often turns confusion into comprehension. Not by adding more effort, but by giving the brain permission to rest long enough to organise itself. To think of dreams only as fiction is to miss their function. They are the mind's way of keeping your story whole. While your body lies still, the invisible librarian turns the pages, makes small annotations and places bookmarks where they're needed. By morning, the book of your life is slightly more complete, though you'll never see the edits that were made overnight. All you'll feel is the calm of having been quietly tended to. If we follow the thread a little further, we'll see that these dreams are not only about remembering, but about feeling, a delicate balancing act between memory and emotion. The librarian is also a healer, one who works not with medicines or machines but with metaphor. As the night deepens, the emotional parts of the brain begin to hum, and in that hum we find the roots of the next mystery, how dreams reshape our fears and comfort our hearts before morning. If memory is the librarian that organizes your inner world, then emotion is the music that fills the library halls. Even when you're sound asleep, emotion keeps humming quietly in the background, shaping every dream you have. Long after your body relaxes and the chatter of the day fades, that small ancient part of your brain, the one that feels before it thinks, remains awake. It's called the amygdala in scientific language, but you can think of it more simply as the ember that keeps the warmth of feeling alive through the night. While the logical mind closes its ledger for the day, this emotional ember keeps glowing, watching, listening, remembering. It doesn't speak in words or reason. It speaks in colours, symbols and sensations. The storm you run from, the hand you reach for, the door you can't quite open. It's no accident that most dreams feel emotional, even when they make no sense. Fear, longing, love, guilt, curiosity. They are the actors on the dream's dimly lit stage. The story changes, but the feeling remains. Dreams are emotional rehearsals, the mind's safe place to feel what it cannot face in daylight. During the day, you suppress, redirect, and smile through the things that sting. At night, when no one's watching, the curtain lifts. The brain replays the emotions it didn't have time to process. That argument you brushed aside, the small shame you forgot to mention, the sudden joy that ended too quickly. They all return in strange disguises, asking to be felt again. You may not recognize them, but your heart does. Think of the brain as a theatre after closing time. The audience is gone, the lights are dim, but backstage the crew is still working, repainting the sets, fixing the ropes, testing the lights for tomorrow's performance. That's what happens in your sleep. The emotional parts of your mind are back there, rehearsing tomorrow's feelings. The fear you'll need to face at work, the calm you'll need in traffic, the kindness you'll need for someone who's hurting. They're all being practiced in miniature, in the safe rehearsal space of dreams. When scientists scan the dreaming brain, they find that emotional centers glow as brightly as they do in waking life, sometimes even more. Meanwhile, the logical regions, the part responsible for reasoning and social restraint, go quiet. The brakes are off, the stage is open, and the actors are improvising. You can feel terror without danger, sadness without loss, love without consequence. It's not chaos, it's catharsis. It's the mind letting itself breathe. That may be why nightmares exist. They are not punishments, they are rehearsals of the hardest scenes. When you dream of falling, of being chased, of losing someone you love, these are not prophecies, they're practice runs. Your mind is letting you feel fear safely, so that, in the daylight, you can endure it better. Even the unpleasant dreams have a purpose. They're emotional exercise, uncomfortable, but strengthening. There's a theory that goes something like this. Throughout evolution, animals that could imagine danger while sleeping were better prepared to survive it while awake. You can see it even in small creatures. Watch a sleeping puppy twitch its paws and whimper softly. It's running through a forest of instinct, preparing for the world. Human beings kept that gift. Our nightmares, though often painful, are part of that same rehearsal. They let us encounter shadows in a place where no real harm can come. Sometimes, though, the rehearsal becomes too vivid. For people who face trauma, the mind replays the same emotional film over and over. It's as if the theatre can't find the right ending. But even here, the same principle applies. The mind is trying to heal itself through repetition. Therapies that help people rewrite these recurring dreams by imagining new outcomes, gentler endings, work because they cooperate with this built-in process. The emotional brain isn't cruel, it's persistent. It keeps bringing the wound to the surface until it can finally close it. The idea that dreams help balance emotion is supported by the simplest evidence of all: how you feel after sleeping well and how you feel when you don't. A good night's sleep leaves you steady, open, able to laugh easily. A sleepless night leaves you fragile, easily moved to tears or anger. It's not just rest you're missing, it's the quiet overnight repair of the emotional circuits. Without that tuning, the music of daily life goes slightly off key, and yet there's something deeply poetic in how the brain chooses to do this work. It doesn't fix feelings through logic or argument. It does it through story. That's why even the most terrifying dreams often dissolve into strange beauty. Flying over mountains after a nightmare, or finding a small light glowing at the end of a dark hallway. The emotional workshop doesn't use words like a therapist would. It uses symbols like a painter. Every dream is an image made of feeling. Imagine your emotions as colours swirling in water. During the day, the jar is shaken, the colours mix wildly. At night, it's set down. Slowly, the pigments begin to separate to find their own calm layers. That's what emotional dreaming does. It lets everything settle softly back into balance. You may wake not knowing why you feel better, only that something inside has become still again. If we look at it this way, the sleeping brain isn't just an observer of feelings, it's an artist shaping them. Each night it sketches your fears, your joys, your small regrets, until they form a picture you can live with. The mind heals itself in art, not analysis. It paints with the materials of your life, rearranging the colours until they make sense to the heart, if not to reason. As we drift further into the story, we begin to notice that these emotional dreams often lead to something unexpected: creativity. The same open, uninhibited state that lets you feel freely also lets you invent freely. When the emotional brain and the imaginative one work together, they create ideas that daylight could never produce. And so the workshop of emotion quietly opens into a studio of inspiration, a place where nightmares can become melodies and fear can turn into art. There's a moment, often just before dawn, when dreams become particularly vivid. Too strange to be random, too beautiful to be meaningless. In those hours, when your body lies perfectly still but your mind is wide open, something extraordinary happens. The strict editor that rules your waking thoughts has fallen asleep, and the dreamer, free of rules, begins to create. This is the mind's creative playground, a place where imagination runs unguarded, where logic softens into watercolour, and where invention begins quietly in the dark. During the day, your thoughts are bound by patterns. You think in straight lines because the waking world rewards predictability. You solve problems, follow schedules, finish sentences. But in dreams, none of that matters. The brain's logical gatekeeper, the one that checks for reason and consistency, finally takes a rest. What remains is the part of the mind that sees connections where none appear. The quiet inventor, the poet, the painter. It begins to play, and out of its playfulness comes creativity. Dreams are where ideas can collide without judgment. In this space, a half-remembered memory might brush against a question you didn't know you were asking. A sound from childhood could meet an image from today and together form a completely new idea. When you wake, it sometimes appears as inspiration. We often call it coincidence or sudden insight, but it's the result of that nocturnal workshop. Your sleeping mind weaving threads from separate worlds into a single tapestry. Paul McCartney once said the melody of yesterday came to him in a dream. He woke convinced he'd heard it somewhere before. He hummed it to friends, asking if they recognised the tune, but no one did. It had been written entirely by his dreaming self. Chemist Dmitry Mendeleev described falling asleep at his desk and waking with a vision of elements arranged in an elegant order. what would become the periodic table. Mary Shelley too dreamt of a creature assembled from parts, trembling into life, and when she woke, she began writing Frankenstein. These stories are proof that the dreaming mind doesn't simply rest, it experiments. Even if you never compose a song or invent something in your sleep, the same process unfolds each night within you. The brain recombines memories and emotions, testing endless variations until it finds something that feels right. It doesn't draw formulas or equations, it sketches connections. It isn't solving like a mathematician, it's sculpting like an artist. Imagine the mind as a potter working in the dark, shaping something from the soft clay of experience, guided not by sight but by touch. This creative state is also why some dreams feel so vividly symbolic. The mind paints abstract ideas as landscapes. Freedom becomes flight, confusion becomes a maze, balance becomes water you can walk on. These images are not random, they are the subconscious translating thought into art. The colours, the gravity, the impossible architectures, all of it reflects the brain's attempt to think beyond its normal limits. Where the waking mind speaks in logic, the dreaming mind sings in metaphor. Psychologists have found that this openness is tied to the same patterns that define creative thinking while awake. When people dream, the parts of the brain responsible for free association, the ability to connect distant ideas, light up. Meanwhile, the critic that demands order goes quiet. The result is a kind of gentle chaos, the perfect soil for imagination. In that chaos, unlikely pairings grow. A distant memory of rain might connect with a hope for tomorrow. A worry becomes a character who finally finds peace. The brain doesn't plan these things, it lets them happen. You can feel this process when you wake from a dream that seems nonsensical yet strangely profound. You may not remember the details, but you carry the feeling that something meaningful occurred. That sensation, the wordless insight, is the echo of creativity. It's your mind remembering that there are other ways to think, ways softer than logic but no less true. Perhaps this is why so many artists, musicians and scientists protect their sleep like treasure. They understand that the hours of dreaming are not wasted. They're hours of subconscious exploration, a place where the imagination rehearses for discovery. The trick is to listen when you wake. Keep a small notebook nearby. Write down fragments, a colour, a sentence, a scene. Even a few words can capture the scent of that night's invention. Many great works began as scribbles like these, notes from the frontier between sleeping and waking. Dreaming is not only for artists, it belongs to everyone. It's the mind's universal permission to play. Think of children who fall asleep easily and wake full of stories. They haven't yet learned to separate imagination from reality, and maybe that's why they dream so freely. As adults, we forget how to wander mentally without purpose, but each night the brain reminds us. It takes us back to that state of playful curiosity, where anything can happen and nothing has to make sense. There is a gentle wisdom in this design. Evolution could have given us rest without dreams. We could have simply powered down, blank and empty until morning. But instead our minds keep wandering. Maybe nature understood that survival isn't only about repairing the body, it's about keeping imagination alive. Creativity is what lets us adapt, love, rebuild, and hope. Without it, life would be mechanical. With it, life continues to surprise itself. So the creative playground is more than entertainment. It's a reminder that imagination is as natural as breathing. Every time you dream, you're practicing the art of possibility. You're proving that your mind can make beauty out of fragments. You might never remember the dream that saves you from a mistake or inspires your next idea, but it happens just the same. Each night, quietly, your mind learns to dance again. From here, the story opens into something darker, yet just as essential. The nightmares that remind us of what we fear and teach us how to face it. For in the same playground where dreams invent wonders, they also build shadows, and those shadows too have something to say. There are nights when sleep feels less like a soft descent and more like a door closing behind you. You drift in as usual, heartbeat slow, breathing steady, but somewhere in the darkness the calm begins to ripple. The scenes you step into feel heavier, the air thicker, as though the dream itself is holding its breath. This is where the theatre of the mind takes on a darker tone. The gentle music that carried you from waking life begins to shift into minor keys. Shadows lengthen, colours deepen, and suddenly you realise that the story you've wandered into is not a pleasant one. A nightmare doesn't arrive like a scream. It enters quietly, like smoke curling under the door. At first it's just a feeling, unease without a name, but soon it begins to take form. Maybe you're running through corridors that twist and change. Maybe you're falling. Maybe you're searching for someone you can never quite reach. The mind paints fear in metaphors. It doesn't need monsters. It uses your own imagination against you, shaping it into something you'll remember even after you wake. Scientists once tried to define nightmares by their physical signs: quickened pulse, sudden wakefulness, fragments of terror replaying in the mind. But that's like trying to describe a thunderstorm by counting the lightning bolts. A nightmare is emotional weather. It's not just fear, it's everything fear brings with it. Confusion, helplessness, guilt, the feeling that you've lost control of your own story. The strange part is that deep down, the nightmare is not your enemy. It's the mind's way of shining a lantern on what hurts most, so it can be seen and softened. When life becomes heavy, the mind carries the weight into sleep, but it doesn't carry it quietly. It bends and twists it into story, hoping that by reliving it symbolically, you'll finally be able to breathe again. That's why stress, grief, and trauma so often find their voice in dreams. They're rehearsing, not haunting. You could think of nightmares as emotional rehearsals, a kind of dress rehearsal for courage. They let you face fear when nothing real can hurt you. They are the heart's fire drills preparing you for what daylight might bring. And sometimes they're the body's way of signalling imbalance. When the rhythm of sleep is broken, when you wake too often, when the mind is restless, the quiet flow of dreaming becomes jagged. The dream's gentle transitions turn abrupt. The harmony turns dissonant. The brain, unable to complete its emotional repair, begins to shout its lessons instead of whispering them. That's what a nightmare is. A dream that's too loud, a story that's lost its patience. There are ways to soothe them, though none involve force. You can't fight a dream into silence, but you can rewrite its ending. Therapists call it rehearsal, but you can think of it more simply as telling your mind a different bedtime story. If a dream repeats, the same chase, the same fear, imagine, before sleeping, a softer conclusion. The moment you usually wake in panic, picture yourself turning around, facing the thing you fear, or walking through the door instead of running away from it. You don't have to control the dream. You only need to offer it a new script. With practice, the mind begins to follow your cue. It learns that not every darkness ends the same way. Children often discover this by accident. A child who dreams of monsters might draw them the next day, give them names, even offer them tea, and soon the monsters lose their teeth. The same principle works for adults, though we rarely believe it will. When you treat a nightmare with curiosity rather than dread, it becomes what it was always meant to be, a messenger. And messages once received don't need to repeat themselves. Some cultures saw nightmares as visits from spirits. Others saw them as the soul wandering too far and struggling to return. But modern understanding is quieter and perhaps kinder. Nightmares are not omens. They are the echoes of unspoken worries, shaping themselves into symbols so that the emotional brain can finally make sense of them. You might dream of drowning after days of feeling overwhelmed. You might dream of being trapped when you've been holding back tears. The imagery is vivid because feeling itself is vivid. Dreams speak the language of emotion, not reason. Even recurring nightmares, the ones that feel endless, are a sign of persistence, not punishment. The mind is trying again and again to finish a piece of emotional work it couldn't complete before, and though it may take time, the repetition is proof of your brain's determination to heal. Imagine a musician practicing the same passage until it's right. Nightmares are that same rehearsal, just written in soundless colour. When you wake from one, heart pounding, the first instinct is to flee from the memory, turn on a light, drink some water, scroll through your phone until reality feels solid again. But if you pause, just for a moment, and let yourself breathe through it, something shifts. You realise that though the dream felt endless, it ended. You survived it. And that quiet realisation is healing in itself. The nightmare is over. You are still here. There's an odd kind of beauty in this, isn't there? The idea that even the mind's darkest creations are trying to help. They may frighten you, but their purpose is protective. They drag the fear into the open, make you look at it, and then dissolve before dawn. The story vanishes, but the courage remains. Every person you know has walked through these night fires. Some remember them vividly, others forget upon waking. But the process is universal. In the grand conversation between body and mind, nightmares are the questions asked in a louder voice. They mean the same thing as the gentler dreams. Please, let me understand this. Even the darkest dreams are trying to heal something. They speak in thunder and shadow, because that's the only way they can be heard. But once their message is received, they fade, making space for calmer skies. And as those skies begin to clear, patterns emerge. Familiar symbols we all seem to share. Dreams of falling, of running, of losing our teeth, or standing exposed before others. They cross languages, cultures, and generations, whispering the same fears in different forms. If we follow that trail, we may discover that nightmares aren't personal at all. They're a shared inheritance woven into our species, teaching us what it means to be human. Every dreamer, no matter where or when they live, seems to stumble into the same strange landscapes. A fall through endless air, a faceless pursuer just beyond reach, teeth turning to sand, standing unprepared in front of a crowd, exposed and trembling, waking up late for an exam you didn't study for. It doesn't matter if you live in a city of glass towers or a village beneath snow. These scenes visit us all. They are the common language of fear, ancient, familiar, and oddly comforting once you recognize them. When you dream of falling, it's rarely about gravity. It's about letting go or being forced to. It's the sensation of losing your grip on control. A job, a relationship, a piece of yourself. Your body remembers the vertigo even when your mind tries to forget. The drop jolts you awake, heart racing, as though the ground had truly vanished beneath you. But when you think about it, there's never really a crash. You always wake just before impact. Perhaps the lesson is that the fear of falling matters more than the fall itself, and that waking is its small promise of safety. Being chased is the next most common dream, and it wears many masks. Sometimes the pursuer is a shadow, sometimes a stranger, sometimes something you can't even name. What you're running from may not exist at all, at least not outside of you. It might be a memory, a responsibility, a version of yourself you'd rather not meet. The chase lets you practice escape, and in doing so, it also shows you that you can. Even if you never stop running in the dream, the motion itself is a form of defiance, proof that you still have energy, even inside fear. Then there are the dreams where teeth loosen and fall one by one. It's a strange image, both intimate and horrifying. Teeth are among the first symbols of strength we ever know. To lose them even in dreams, is to feel suddenly fragile. These are often the nights when you've been worrying about how others see you, your voice, your confidence, your aging body. But even that embarrassment has meaning. The dream is reminding you how much you value your ability to speak, to be heard, to bite back against the world when needed. When you wake and touch your teeth with your tongue, it's not vanity, it's gratitude. Dreams of public nudity work the same way. You find yourself standing in front of others, at work, in a crowd, sometimes even among friends, and realise you're bare. The room freezes and shame floods in like cold water, but no one in the dream truly sees you. The fear is not of the body, it's of exposure, of being known too well. You might have told a half-truth recently, or hidden something small but important. The mind recreates that moment, stripped of context, until you face the feeling of vulnerability directly. It's the psyche's way of whispering, "Be honest, and you won't need to hide." And then there's that endless exam, the one you haven't prepared for, the paper blank before you. No matter how long it's been since school, the dream returns. A reminder that deep down, everyone worries about being tested. It might not be an exam at all, but a situation that demands proof of your worth, your competence, your calm. The dream is a rehearsal, giving you a safe place to fail, so that when the real test comes, you'll recognise the feeling and remember you've survived it before. These shared dream themes, falling, running, losing, revealing, travel through cultures like old stories retold in new languages. Ancient Egyptians wrote about dreams of flight and pursuit. Modern psychologists jot them down in journals and still find the same symbols. The details change. Different clothing, different landscapes, but the core emotions stay the same. It's as if human beings carry a collective memory of fear. Not fear of monsters, but of the fragility that comes with being alive. There's something strangely unifying about that. The person next to you on a bus might have had the same dream you did last night. Someone centuries ago, sleeping in a cave or a castle, might have woken from the same chase, heart pounding the same rhythm. These aren't just personal anxieties. They're echoes of survival lessons passed down through the nervous system itself. Our ancestors ran from real predators. Now we run from deadlines and expectations. The brain hasn't changed its language or only its metaphors. Sometimes these dreams even mix with humour. The mind, for all its intensity, knows how to tease itself. You might dream you're giving a grand speech while wearing mismatched socks, or that your old teacher suddenly transforms into a friendly dog halfway through the lecture. Laughter, even in dreams, is a pressure valve. It's your mind reminding you that embarrassment can be survived, that even when the stage lights of fear flare up, there's still room to smile. When you step back and see these patterns, nightmares begin to feel less personal. They're part of the human curriculum. Falling teaches you about surrender. Chasing teaches you persistence. Losing teaches you resilience. Being exposed teaches you humility. They're all lessons on how to live more gently with uncertainty. And uncertainty, after all, is what most of waking life feels like. Dream researchers sometimes say that fear is the price of imagination. The same brain that invents beauty also invents danger. It simulates what could go wrong so you'll know how to survive it. If you can remember this while dreaming, or even after waking, you'll find that your mind has been protecting you all along. It frightens you not to torment but to prepare. Everyone dreams in their own style, some in colour, some in fragments, some in words. Yet these fears keep recurring like motifs in a symphony. You could live a lifetime apart from another person, and still share these same nocturnal rehearsals. Maybe that's why talking about dreams feels intimate. You're not just describing a story, you're revealing the hidden chords of being human. So, when you next wake from a nightmare or an awkward, absurd dream, pause before dismissing it. Somewhere within that strangeness is a familiar lesson. We dream in different languages, but our fears share the same accent. And if you listen closely, you might even recognise the tune. the same melody that connects us all in the dark. If we follow that melody a little further, it leads us to an intriguing paradox. The part of the brain that allows such wild creativity also holds the key to awareness itself. The same theatre that plays your nightmares can, on rare occasions, let you realise that you're inside the play. And that's where the dream begins to change, from something you drift through to something you can steer. When you dream, the stage of the mind grows alive with sound and movement. But the director, the logical part of you, quietly leaves the theatre. The scenes unfold without a script, the actors improvise, and emotion takes over the story. It might sound chaotic, yet there's an order in this freedom, a kind of balance that only sleep understands. During the day, the director is tireless. It reviews every decision, corrects mistakes, worries about outcomes, rewrites sentences before you speak them. It's the voice that says, "That doesn't make sense," or "Don't say that out loud." But when you fall asleep, that voice softens into silence. The logical guardian, the prefrontal part of your brain, finally rests. The emotional regions, the artists and musicians of the mind, take the stage. They play louder, paint brighter, and explore freely. It's a strange trade. To stay sane while awake, you need logic to keep imagination from running wild. But to stay whole while asleep, you need to let imagination off its leash. This nightly shift, reason resting, emotion rising, is what allows dreams to feel so vivid. Without the director's interference, your mind can combine colours and sensations that would never meet in waking life. You can breathe underwater, talk to a shadow, or find yourself walking through a house that remembers you, even though it never existed. There's a quiet wisdom in this exchange. When reason steps aside, emotion can finally express itself. It's as if the mind, freed from daylight rules, can confess what it's been holding back. The stories that emerge might not make sense, but they make meaning. The logic of dreams isn't linear, it's emotional. Every scene is a sentence written in feeling rather than grammar. You wake and remember fragments. The glow of a streetlight, a face that felt important, a door you didn't open, and though they defy explanation, they linger, humming with quiet significance. This is why dreams can both comfort and disturb. With the guardian asleep, boundaries blur. You might revisit a childhood home or speak with someone long gone. These aren't supernatural events. They're the mind's way of retrieving emotions it wants to feel again. When you meet someone you've lost in a dream, your brain isn't pretending they're alive. It's reminding you that the love remains. The director might call that irrational, but the dreaming mind knows that feelings are their own kind of truth. And sometimes something remarkable happens. In the middle of this unsupervised performance, a small spark of awareness flickers on. You realise, somehow, that you're dreaming. The actors pause, the scenery shimmers, the dream continues, but a new presence has entered. You. Not the sleeping body, not the half-conscious observer, but the part of yourself that knows this is all a stage. That spark of recognition is lucidity. Lucid dreaming is a peculiar paradox, being both asleep and awake at once. It's as though the director has returned quietly to the back of the theatre, not to control the play, but simply to watch it with open eyes. You may still fly, swim through stars or walk through walls, but now you know it's you who chooses to. You can steer the story without breaking the illusion. It's an awareness so delicate that even excitement can make it vanish. The moment you think too loudly, "I'm dreaming," the curtain often falls and you wake. To reach lucidity is to stand between two worlds. Your body lies still, muscles safely paralysed so you don't act out the dream, but your mind begins to regain its self-awareness. This delicate balance, awareness returning, imagination still in control, is one of nature's quiet marvels. Scientists who study it say that parts of the brain light up again, gently, like city streets turning their lamps back on before dawn. But you don't need to picture neurons or signals. Just imagine a dim theatre where the house lights rise ever so slightly, enough for the audience to realise they've been part of the performance all along. For most people, lucid dreams arrive by accident, an ordinary dream that suddenly breaks open into clarity. Sometimes it happens when something impossible occurs, a clock melting, a door opening into the same room again, a conversation looping back on itself. The dreamer senses that something isn't quite right, and instead of waking, they simply notice. Awareness blooms like a small candle in the dark, and for a few moments, they hold the strange gift of control inside chaos. This experience isn't rare, it's simply unnoticed. Many people wake just as it begins, confused by the intensity. Others drift with it for a while, shaping landscapes, flying, or revisiting places that no longer exist. It's an extraordinary reminder that the mind is both the dreamer and the world it dreams. Everything you see inside that space is you, your fears, your memories, your desires, your creativity, wearing costumes of light and motion. Lucid dreams remind us that awareness is not limited to wakefulness. Even when reason sleeps, the self never entirely disappears. It waits patiently beneath the layers of story, ready to return when the moment is right. And in that returning, something profound happens. You realise that the mind can awaken even while the body rests. Awareness, it turns out, is not a switch that's either on or off. It's a spectrum, a dimmer that the brain can adjust with astonishing grace. Perhaps that's why lucid dreams feel sacred to those who experience them. They are moments when the curtain between worlds becomes translucent, when you glimpse how fluid consciousness truly is. You're both creator and witness, both actor and audience, both the storm and the calm at its centre. The dream doesn't end, it simply changes texture, becoming a place you can explore rather than endure. Our quiet exploration now turns to how such awareness can be encouraged, how dreamers can learn to enter that state willingly without breaking its fragile beauty. It's less about control than about trust. The same way you drift into sleep each night without force, you can drift into awareness within the dream by learning how to recognize its language. For those who practice it, lucidity isn't just play. It's a conversation with the deepest parts of the self, carried out in symbols and stars. Imagine a dream that feels so real you could reach out and touch it, the air thick and cool, the floor solid beneath your feet. Then something small shifts. Perhaps the clock on the wall melts into ink, or gravity forgets to pull quite as hard as it should. You look around and realise with the gentlest shock of recognition, this isn't real, you're dreaming. And yet, the moment doesn't vanish. The world doesn't dissolve into fog. It remains vivid and alive, waiting for you to decide what happens next. Lucid dreaming begins quietly like that, not with thunder or revelation, but with noticing. The light of awareness flickers back on, faint but steady within the dreaming mind. The logical part of you, the quiet guardian that rests during ordinary dreams, stirs, blinking like a lamp rising through water. It doesn't take over. It simply watches, remembering itself. You know where you are, and at the same time you know you never left your bed. It's a delicate balance, one foot in imagination, the other in awareness. The first instinct for many is wonder. The colours feel brighter, as though the dream has been waiting for you to see it properly. The air seems to hum, sounds have texture. You might run your hand along a wall, curious to feel whether it's cold or warm, and find that it feels both, or neither, something new entirely. You might breathe underwater and find the sensation smoother than air, or lift your feet from the ground and rise into the sky with no effort at all. The dream responds instantly to thought, reshaping itself like soft clay around your intentions. But awareness can be fragile. Too much excitement, and the dream ripples away like disturbed water. Think too loudly and the world begins to fade. That's why most lucid dreamers learn instinctively to stay calm, to move slowly, as though they're carrying a flame that could go out if they breathe too hard. The paradox is enchanting. You have infinite freedom, but it depends entirely on restraint. You can do anything except wake yourself too soon. The sensation of flight in a lucid dream isn't the same as the flying we imagine in waking life. There's no wind, no weight, no effort. It's the feeling of will made visible. Every motion is intention turned into motion. If you begin to fall, you can decide not to. If the horizon looks dull, you can think of colour and it blooms. The rules of physics still appear to apply, but only until you remember that they don't have to. In this world, belief is gravity. You might think of it as a rehearsal for awareness itself, a miniature version of enlightenment, practiced every night by the sleeping mind. You wake within your own imagination and see how easily you mistake your thoughts for the world. The lesson, if there is one, is humility. If you can be fooled so completely by your own creation, how much of waking life is also made from dreams that have simply learned to last longer? Some dreamers use their lucidity to explore curiosity rather than control. They ask questions of the dream itself, the walls, the sky, the faceless strangers, and sometimes the dream answers, not in words you could record, but in feelings that speak to something older than language. It's as though a deeper layer of yourself, usually hidden, finally has a voice. You might ask, "Who are you?" And the dream will shift into an image that says, "You already know." Others use it for creativity, to wander through impossible architecture, to sketch melodies that might survive the morning, to practice courage by walking calmly through what would normally terrify them. Whatever the motive, lucidity offers a gentle glimpse of how vast your mind really is. It's a reminder that imagination is not a tool but a landscape, one that doesn't end where waking begins. There's humour in this too. Imagine realising you're dreaming, and instead of flying or shaping galaxies, you decide to sit at a cafe and order a cup of coffee. From a dragon, perhaps. And the dragon, polite and unbothered, brings it to you exactly as you like it, perfectly hot, the steam curling into shapes you almost recognise. For a moment, everything feels both ordinary and magical, like life itself. That kind of gentle absurdity is what makes lucidity delightful. It reveals that the extraordinary has always lived quietly beside the mundane. Science, of course, has its way of describing all this. It might tell you that certain regions of the brain regain activity during lucid dreaming, that self-awareness rekindles in the folds of the frontal lobe, where logic and reflection reside. But that language feels too clinical for what it truly is. It's not about neurons sparking. It's about consciousness remembering itself. The sleeping mind doesn't switch between off and on. It slides gracefully across shades of awareness, like dawn spreading through a foggy valley. Perhaps that's what makes lucid dreams so personal. They remind us that awareness isn't something we have, it's something we are. It can dim, fade or flare, but it never disappears completely. Even when logic sleeps, the light of the self waits beneath, ready to return. In a lucid dream, you witness that return firsthand. You see the mind's layers overlapping, imagination, emotion, reason, all working together, not in conflict, but in harmony. It's consciousness singing softly to itself, and then, just as easily as it began, it ends. Maybe you wake with a start, sunlight already brushing your curtains. Maybe you stay half in the dream for a few seconds, feeling the fading gravity of that the world. You might reach for a notebook, trying to capture it before it slips away, but the words never quite match. That's all right. Lucidity doesn't need to be remembered to be real. Its purpose is the reminder it leaves behind, that your mind is capable of more awareness, more creation, and more calm than you ever imagined. As we drift further into the story, the next question arises naturally. Can this strange awareness be invited, practiced, or learned? Or must it remain an accidental gift, a brief flicker of light in the dark? The answer lies in the space between intention and surrender, the same place where dreams themselves are born. Lucid dreaming may seem like an accident, a lucky spark in the darkness. But for many people it becomes something gentler and more deliberate. It's not a talent or a trick, it's a form of listening. You're learning to hear the mind's quiet hum as it drifts towards sleep, to recognise the border between waking and dreaming and walk across it without breaking it. The art of dreaming awake is less about control and more about awareness, less about bending the dream to your will and more about meeting it halfway. The first step often begins before sleep even arrives. As you lie still, you might think of a place you want to visit in your dream, not with force, but with affection. The goal isn't to command the mind, but to invite it. It's like leaving breadcrumbs for your future self to follow. The last thought before sleep becomes a small candle flickering in the dark corridor of the subconscious, guiding you back when the dream begins. People sometimes call this setting an intention. In softer language, you could think of it as writing a love letter to the part of you that will soon be asleep. When you find yourself wandering, remember, you're dreaming. Then comes the gentle act of noticing. Awareness, after all, can't be forced. You can't hold on to it tightly. It slips away like water. But you can prepare yourself to recognize it. During the day, pause from time to time and simply ask, is this real? Look around. Notice the weight of your feet on the floor, the air touching your skin, the details of your surroundings. These small reality checks are not tests, they're reminders. The more you practice seeing the world while awake, the more likely you are to notice when it bends in dreams. You begin to carry awareness like a small mirror, one that reflects even in the dark. Some people keep a dream journal. Each morning they write whatever fragments remain. The strange hallway, the missing train, the face without a name. Over time, patterns appear, like constellations slowly forming in the sky. Certain symbols repeat: doors, animals, oceans, staircases, and soon you recognize them as signposts. When those images appear again in a dream, something clicks. I've been here before. That recognition can open the door to lucidity, gently and naturally. The journal isn't just a record, it's a map drawn by memory and feeling, pointing you toward awareness. Others find that sound or light can become companions on the journey. A soft melody playing as you drift off might weave itself into your dream, a thread connecting one world to the next. Or perhaps a faint glimmer from a nightlight becomes the dawn inside the dream itself. These are bridges, sensory clues that let your mind realize I'm still here. They don't pull you out of the dream, they help you remain gently aware within it. And sometimes, lucidity begins when you catch yourself inside a mirror. Dream mirrors have always been strange, reflecting not faces but moods, memories, or entire landscapes. In practice, people often use them as reminders. They tell themselves before sleeping, when I see a mirror, I'll remember I'm dreaming. It's a poetic thought, catching yourself inside your own reflection, recognizing that even the reflection is part of you. This isn't superstition, it's psychology disguised as wonder. The mirror is simply a tool that teaches you to recognize the feeling of awareness itself. Of course, there are methods with complicated names and scientific abbreviations, ways of timing your sleep cycles or setting alarms. But the essence of all of them is simple: patience and curiosity. The dream doesn't open to commands, it opens to invitations. The mind is shy that way. It prefers to reveal itself to those who wait with calm fascination. Think of it as coaxing a bird to land on your hand. The moment you reach too quickly, it flies away. Lucid dreamers often speak of learning to float on awareness rather than steer it. They describe it as walking across a still pond without disturbing the reflection. To reach that balance, you have to surrender to the rhythm of the dream. trusting it to carry you where it will. Control may be possible, but it's fragile, a soap bubble that bursts if gripped too tightly. That's why the best lucid dreams happen not to those who demand, but to those who observe. The trick, if there is one, is kindness toward the dream itself. Treat it as a friend showing you around its world, not a servant obeying your will. There's a quiet irony in learning to dream awake. The more you chase lucidity, the more elusive it becomes. The mind senses effort and retreats. But when you simply rest with curiosity, when you fall asleep thinking, I wonder what I'll find tonight, lucidity sometimes arrives unannounced, like an old friend who slips through the door because it knows it's welcome. It's the gentle art of holding an open palm rather than a closed fist. And when it does arrive, the experience often feels humble rather than grand. You might not fly across galaxies. You might just walk through a quiet garden and notice every leaf, every sound, as though seeing them for the first time. The awareness itself becomes the wonder. You realize that control isn't the point. Presence is. The goal is not to manipulate the dream, but to inhabit it. To be awake inside imagination, just enough to see how endlessly creative it is. Still, there's a caution worth keeping in mind. The power to shape a dream can feel intoxicating. Some people try to recreate paradise, to build endless worlds, to outdo reality itself. But too much control can make the dream thin, as though the fabric of imagination begins to wear through. The colours fade, the people turn silent, the world loses its warmth. Awareness becomes arrogance, and the dream gently dissolves, sending the dreamer back to waking life. The lesson here is quiet but profound. The mind can bend only so far before it snaps back to balance. Lucidity, like waking life, depends on humility. So if you practice, do so softly. Let awareness come and go like the tide. Keep a notebook by your bed. Leave small notes to your sleeping self and treat the process as play, not progress. Every dream you remember, every flicker of clarity is a conversation with the deeper layers of you. That's the real treasure. Not control, but connection. The dream is showing you how awareness works. It grows when observed gently and fades when forced. Our quiet exploration now turns to the fragile balance that follows, that trembling line between empowerment and surrender. For every lucid dream that feels like flight, there are others that turn uneasy when the dream begins to move on its own, when awareness becomes a mirror that looks back. It's there, in that delicate tension, that the story takes its next mysterious turn. Awareness inside a dream is a precious thing. It glows like a lantern in a wind that could blow it out at any moment. The more you focus on it, the more it flickers. Hold it too tightly and it disappears. Let it drift too far and you fall back into ordinary dreaming. Somewhere between those two edges lies a fragile balance, a space where imagination and consciousness move together, perfectly in step like dancers following the same slow rhythm. In this quiet equilibrium, you can feel both the vastness of the dream and the thin thread that connects you back to waking life. It's intoxicating. Every thought becomes a landscape, every feeling architecture. You think of a door and there it is. You picture light and dawn spills through the ceiling. The world bends to your emotion, not your logic. That's what makes lucidity feel so powerful. It turns you into both artist and canvas. But with that power comes a whisper of unease, a question the dreaming mind can't help but ask. If I can shape this world, then who shaped me? Many lucid dreamers describe moments when the dream resists their control. They decide to fly, and their feet stay stubbornly on the ground. They try to speak, and the air thickens around them. Or sometimes, the dream itself begins to act with intention, a character who refuses to vanish, a voice that answers back, a door that locks itself no matter how many times you will it open. These moments can feel haunting, like the story has learned to write itself. But in truth, this is the subconscious reasserting balance. Even within lucidity, There's a boundary between creation and mystery. The dream is reminding you, this world belongs to both of us. It's tempting to call this confrontation supernatural, to imagine other presences, hidden forces, but science offers a softer, more human explanation. The conscious self that becomes lucid is only a small part of a much larger orchestra. The subconscious, the emotional, intuitive, memory-bound expanse beneath awareness, keeps playing even when the conductor awakens. When you feel the dream resist, it's not defiance, it's dialogue. The deeper mind is saying, you may lead for a while, but I still hold the music. And yet, that tension can create moments of wonder and dread in equal measure. Some dreamers report standing face to face with their own reflections that move independently, or hearing their names spoken from the dark by voices that seem to know them intimately. These experiences can feel like the mind splitting in two, the dreamer and the dreamed, each aware of the other. But there's beauty in that mirror. It's a glimpse of consciousness seeing itself, something that even waking thought rarely achieves. You could think of it like balancing on the edge of a wave. On one side lies imagination, rolling endlessly toward the shore. On the other, awareness, calm and observing. When you stay poised between them, the dream feels infinite, alive, and responsive. Tip too far toward control and it collapses into emptiness. Tip too far toward surrender and it sweeps you away. Maintaining. Lucidity is not an act of dominance but of grace. It's the art of staying afloat without splashing. Still, not every dreamer finds comfort there. The ability to shape your world can quickly turn into the fear that someone, or something, else might seize the controls. When lucidity deepens, the dream's realism can be overwhelming. You touch a wall and feel its coolness, hear distant wind, smell the scent of rain, and forget for a heartbeat that any of it is imaginary. That's when unease creeps in, the suspicion that perhaps you're no longer alone in your own creation. But maybe that's part of the lesson. Dreams are built from everything you are. Your hopes, your fears, your memories, your kindness, your hidden cruelty. Every figure you meet, every voice you hear is a fragment of yourself wearing another face. When they move independently, it isn't invasion, it's revelation. The dream is showing you the parts of you that live beneath awareness. They aren't strangers. They're the echoes of emotions you haven't yet named. In ancient traditions, lucid dreamers were often considered travelers between worlds, not because they touched other realms, but because they learned to face themselves without flinching. To dream awake is to step into a hall of mirrors and walk through it calmly, knowing that every reflection is both illusion and truth. Each mirror moves slightly differently, each reflection whispering, "You made me, but I can still surprise you." And perhaps that surprise is necessary. Total control would mean total isolation, a dream with no mystery, no resistance, no life of its own. The unpredictable elements are what make lucidity feel alive. Without them, it would be a game of imagination rather than a meeting of consciousness. The balance between control and surrender is what gives the experience its awe, its emotional gravity. So when the dream begins to act on its own, don't be afraid. Instead, listen. Treat it as you would a friend who knows something you don't. Ask softly what it wants to show you. Often, the answer will come not in words, but in movement. The dream guiding you toward a landscape, a door, a face. You follow, and in doing so, you rediscover humility. Awareness may illuminate the dream, but the dream still holds the mystery. And then, there are moments when this shared authorship spills beyond the individual. Across time and continents, dreamers have reported meeting the same figures: a teacher, a guide, a stranger who seems to know their name. Whether coincidence, psychology, or something deeper, the pattern is unmistakable, as if, in our separate minds, certain stories find the same shape. One of these stories begins with a single sketch, a face seen by many who never met each other, yet swore they had encountered him in their sleep. It started quietly, like a rumour carried on the wind of dreams. A woman in New York told her therapist about the man who visited her, nights, a face both ordinary and unforgettable. The therapist, puzzled, drew the man's features in pencil and set the sketch aside on the desk. Weeks later, another patient looked down, froze, and whispered, "I've seen him too." From that moment, the image began to travel, slipping out of one mind and into countless others. The world didn't yet know his name, but it soon would. And so, as we drift further into the story, we follow that strange face, half mystery, half mirror, into the shared landscape of dreaming. It began, as many strange stories do, with something small. A quiet room in New York, the faint hum of an old air conditioner, a woman sitting across from her psychiatrist, twisting a handkerchief in her fingers as she described a dream that refused to leave her. There was a man in it, she said, not frightening exactly, but unforgettable. He would appear without warning. Sometimes he smiled, sometimes he said nothing. He wasn't someone she knew, yet every feature felt familiar, as though he had stepped out of a memory that didn't belong to her. The psychiatrist, curious, asked her to describe him in detail. He took a sheet of paper, sharpened a pencil, and began to sketch as she spoke. A high forehead, arched brows, eyes slightly too large, a mouth that looked halfway between a smile and a warning. When the sketch was done, he set it on his desk and thought little more of it. Just another curious artifact from the subconscious. One face among thousands the mind invents each night. A few weeks later, another patient came in. The same city, the same office. Another quiet confession of restless sleep. The psychiatrist listened, nodding gently until the patient noticed the drawing on his desk. The man stared, his expression draining of colour. "That's him," he whispered. "That's the man I see in my dreams." The coincidence was too peculiar to ignore. The doctor began to ask around, showing the drawing discreetly to other colleagues. A handful of people claimed to have seen the same face. They described the same heavy brows, the same strange calm in the eyes, the same half smile that hovered like an unfinished sentence. The more people who saw it, the more who recognised it. By 2006, the sketch had escaped the office entirely. Someone, no one quite remembers who, uploaded it to the early corners of the internet to a plain website that called itself thisman.org. The site invited visitors to look at the drawing and answer a simple question. Have you dreamed this man? Below it, there was a growing list of testimonies from around the world. Rome, Tokyo, Johannesburg, Sao Paulo. Dozens of cities, hundreds of stories, all circling back to the same face. The reports were eerily similar. Some said he guided them through their dreams, warning of danger. Others said he stood at a distance, silently watching. A few described him smiling kindly, offering comfort during nightmares. One person claimed he told them to go north, though they couldn't explain why. Another swore he appeared whenever they were about to wake, whispering, "It's time." The more the story spread, the stranger it became. Posters began to appear, at first in Italy, then across Europe, later in Asia and North America. Always the same sketch, photocopied 1,000 times, sometimes slightly distorted, sometimes scribbled over with messages in different languages. "This man has appeared in your dreams," they said. "If you see him, tell us." People stopped to look. Some laughed, some shivered, some walked away feeling as though they recognised him but couldn't recall from where. Others began to dream of him only after seeing the poster, as if suggestion itself had pulled him into their sleep. Psychologists call this the power of expectation, the mind's ability to fill its own stories. But to those who dreamed of him, it felt like something else, a signal, an intrusion, a shared hallucination too vast to dismiss. His face was odd in its ordinariness, not handsome, not grotesque, but precisely average. That was part of the eeriness. He could be anyone. the uncle you haven't seen in years, the man who walks past your window, the stranger on the subway who never looks up. His expression seemed to shift depending on who looked at him. Kind to some, stern to others, sinister to a few. It was as though the drawing itself absorbed the mood of whoever gazed at it. The media, of course, caught wind of the phenomenon. Newspapers ran stories under headlines that balanced disbelief with fascination. The man who visits everyone's dreams. Blogs shared the image like a digital ghost story. Television shows discussed it between segments about politics and weather, and each time the story reached new ears, new people reported dreaming of him. The face multiplied, not through supernatural power, but through the strange contagion of human attention. There's something deeply human about that, how easily ideas move between us, how quickly imagination spreads when it finds a good host. The This Man story wasn't just about one drawing. It was about our hunger for connection, even in the surreal. It was a kind of collective lucid dream, one shared by thousands who had never met. People began to wonder if dreaming of the same face meant something profound, that we were linked through a hidden web of thought. But there's a quieter possibility too. Maybe this man didn't connect us because he was real. Maybe he connected us because fear and curiosity always live side by side in the human mind. The moment we see something unexplained, we build meaning around it. We reach for patterns, for myth, and dreams, which are already half story and half mystery, make the perfect ground for that kind of belief to grow. The psychiatrist's sketch, simple, faint pencil lines on paper, had become something much larger than either he or the woman who first described it could have imagined. The face had stepped out of the dream and into the waking world, and people everywhere were suddenly aware that their private nightscapes might not be as private as they thought. It's an unsettling thought, isn't it? That the mind, which feels so personal, might echo the minds of others. That imagination could ripple outward like sound waves, syncing the stories of strangers. Perhaps that's what makes this story linger. It sits at the crossroads of psychology and folklore, where science and superstition shake hands for a moment before parting ways. If you close your eyes now and picture the face, high forehead, calm eyes, faint smile, you might feel that faint pull of recognition too. Not because he's real, but because your mind, like everyone's, is built to complete unfinished stories. A few lines, a few words, and the imagination fills in the rest. That's what the This Man story really showed us. Not that something mysterious had entered our dreams, but that our dreams had always been ready to welcome him. As we drift further into the story, we'll follow how that single drawing spread like a quiet contagion, across screens, across languages, across the invisible web that connects one sleeping mind to another. Because after all, once you've seen a face in your dreams, you can't help but look for it again. The face travelled farther than anyone could have imagined. At first, it was only a whisper, an image sent from one friend to another, an odd curiosity passed between co-workers late at night. Then it began to surface in public, printed on rough paper, stapled to telephone poles, taped to the corners of bus stops. Always the same question written beneath: have you dreamed this man? No one knew exactly who started it, or how it spread so quickly. But by the time winter rolled around, his gaze was everywhere. In Rome, commuters stared at him between train stops. In Tokyo, his face peered from the edges of bulletin boards, his features slightly blurred by photocopy after photocopy. In London, his posters fluttered in the cold wind near subway entrances, the paper edges curled like petals around a forgotten bloom. And soon, people began to talk. Some said they had seen him years before the posters appeared, in dreams where he stood at the edge of a crowd or on a street that stretched too far into darkness. Others said they only dreamed of him after seeing his face. They would fall asleep and find him waiting, sitting quietly in a chair or standing beside a window that overlooked nothing. His expression never changed, but the feeling he brought did. To some he was kind, almost fatherly. To others he was distant, unsettling, impossible to read. The stories multiplied. A teacher in Canada said he guided her through a nightmare, telling her not to be afraid. A man in Brazil said the same face appeared to him on a boat, in the middle of a storm, whispering directions that led him safely to shore. A woman in Germany dreamed of him holding her hand while her world collapsed around them, saying simply, "It's over now." And then there were the darker accounts, the ones whispered on internet forums in half-believing tones. People who claimed that when they looked too closely at him, his features shifted, melting into someone else's face entirely. Soon, this man had a reputation that changed depending on who spoke his name. Some believed he was a collective guardian, a sort of cosmic counselor visiting the dreaming minds of humanity. Others thought he was an omen, a messenger of endings. A few even joked that he was a government experiment, a shared implant of imagination. But beneath the humour ran a quiet unease, because the more you thought about him, the more familiar he seemed. The image itself didn't help. It was ordinary in a way that refused to stay ordinary. The high forehead, the slightly heavy eyebrows, the broad nose, the half smile that never reached the eyes. Features that could belong to almost anyone, yet somehow to no one at all. Psychologists pointed out that the mind is a master of synthesis. Every time you see a stranger, it stores their face in fragments. The curve of one person's jaw, the glance of another, a memory of a face from childhood. When you dream, it rearranges those pieces, creating new people who feel eerily real. This man could have been born from that collage, a shared sketch stitched from the crowd of human memory. But the human mind doesn't like coincidences. It loves patterns, stories, meaning. Once the rumour took hold, it spread like a digital ghost story. Websites compiled hundreds of sightings. Artists painted him into murals. Musicians wrote songs inspired by the dream. A filmmaker in Italy used his likeness in a short horror film, which in turn caused a new wave of claims. Each new retelling kept the face alive, feeding it with curiosity. If you were online at the time, you might remember scrolling through threads filled with grainy images of his face. People swore they'd seen him, or that their friends had, or that their friends' friends had. Each comment deepened the legend. It was impossible to tell who was sincere and who was playing along, and that ambiguity made it all the more believable. In the vast web of the internet, rumour behaves like weather, impossible to stop once it starts to move. Then came the phrase that sealed the myth, "Go north." It appeared in a few of the early testimonies, simple and mysterious. Some dreamers claimed he had whispered it to them. Others said it appeared as writing on walls, or murmured through radios, or scribbled on paper inside their dreams. Go north. 2 words, directionless yet profound. Forums filled with interpretations. Some said it was a call to awakening, to self-awareness. Others took it literally, organising online groups to track dreamers by geography, wondering if those who lived farther north saw him more often. Of course, none of it led anywhere, but the phrase endured, like a refrain in a song no one could forget. Even today, people occasionally comment on old blog posts or videos, writing simply, "He told me to go north." It doesn't matter what it means. The point was never the direction, it was the connection, the thrill of being part of a mystery shared by strangers around the world. In a way, this man became the first urban legend born entirely out of sleep. He wasn't a ghost or a monster or a god, he was an idea, a face that lived in the grey zone between memory and imagination, multiplied by belief. His power came not from truth, but from the way people needed him to be true. Because deep down, everyone wants proof that dreams connect us, that what we see at night isn't just random noise, but some vast conversation our minds are all having together. The phenomenon didn't stay on the fringes. By the early 2010s, journalists and TV hosts began to cover it with cautious fascination. They showed the sketch on screen, asked audiences to call in if they'd ever seen him. Thousands claimed they had. For a while, it seemed that this man had stepped out of the realm of folklore into modern mythology, a myth perfectly shaped for the digital age, mysterious enough to spread, harmless enough to discuss, eerie enough to remember. But behind the fascination was a quieter truth, that the entire story had taken on a life of its own. Whether he was ever seen by anyone before the website existed hardly mattered anymore. What mattered was that the story felt real, and that feeling had its own gravity. This man no longer belonged to one mind. He belonged to everyone who dreamed of him, or thought they did. And perhaps that's the strangest part. The human mind can create entire worlds from nothing but suggestion. One image, one question, and the imagination rushes to fill in the rest. In a way, this man was never a person. He was a mirror. When people looked at him, they didn't see a stranger. They saw the shape of their own curiosity, reflected back from the dark. If we follow that reflection further, we find that the truth behind this man is both simpler and more revealing than anyone expected. The posters, the website, even the testimonies, all were part of something else entirely, not a haunting, but an experiment. Not an urban legend born by accident, but by design. And that's where the story of the face takes its final turn, toward the confession that unmasked the dream. Every mystery, no matter how strange, eventually reaches daylight. The face that haunted the world's dreams was no exception. For nearly a decade, this man lingered in the twilight between myth and psychology, a question no one could quite answer, a story that refused to end. But in 2015, the curtain finally lifted. The truth was quieter than anyone expected, and perhaps more revealing than the legend itself. That year, the magazine Vice published an article tracing the origins of the phenomenon. The journalist had spoken to the person behind the website, the one who first asked the world, "Have you dreamed this man?" His name was Andrea Natella, an Italian artist known for experiments in what he called guerrilla communication. The phrase sounds combative, but his intentions were almost philosophical. He wanted to see how ideas move, how suggestion alone could create a ripple across minds and continents. According to Natella, the sketch was not drawn by a psychiatrist in New York. The patient never existed. The testimonies were fabrications composed from fragments of real letters and imagined ones. The website itself was an art project disguised as an investigation. He wanted to explore how stories take shape, how fear and curiosity can weave together until fiction feels like shared memory. When Vice revealed this, it didn't come with anger or outrage. The revelation landed softly, like a secret that everyone had half suspected but didn't want to spoil. The confession didn't kill the story. In some ways, it made it more fascinating. People realized that what they'd been witnessing wasn't a haunting, but a mirror held up to human imagination. The website hadn't planted the image. It had watered a seed that already lived in all of us. Our minds are built to find faces, to detect meaning in randomness. It's a survival trait from long before we had cities or stories. The slightest arrangement of shapes, 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth, and the brain leaps to recognize it. Psychologists have a word for this gentle illusion: pareidolia. But we don't need the term to understand it. We've all seen faces in clouds, in peeling paint, in the pattern of wood grain. The mind, ever hopeful, keeps looking for company, even in chaos. That's what this man became, a collective act of pareidolia. We looked at the sketch and saw not a stranger, but an echo of everyone we've ever known. The face was ordinary enough to be universal, like a composite dream stitched from humanity's shared imagination. Once the story existed, People didn't need to have dreamed of him to believe it possible. The possibility itself was enough to make it feel true. And truth, in this context, was never about facts. It was about feeling. For those who swore they had seen him, the experience was real. Their hearts had raced, their minds had conjured his features in sleep, their emotions had reacted. Whether the source was suggestion or subconscious pattern, the effect was authentic. The brain doesn't distinguish easily between a memory and a vivid dream. Both are stitched from the same cloth of imagery and emotion. In that way, this man was a living experiment in how belief shapes perception. But perhaps the most beautiful part of the story lies not in its deception, but in what it revealed about us. People wanted the story to be true because it spoke to something universal, the wish that our inner worlds might overlap, that we might not be as alone in our dreaming as we sometimes feel in our waking hours. The hoax succeeded not because we were gullible, but because we were longing for connection. A shared dream, even imagined, feels comforting in a way statistics and science cannot explain. When Nutella was later asked if he regretted misleading the public, he smiled and said that he had created a myth, not a lie. He hadn't tricked the world for money or fame. He had held up a mirror and let people see what they wanted to see. And what they saw, he suggested, was themselves. The story proved that the boundaries of the mind are far more porous than we think. Ideas, fears, and images can pass between us as easily as air, changing form as they go. The dream world, he believed, is not private at all. It's a field we share, each of us contributing to its endless texture. That idea, that we dream together, even unknowingly, is poetic, but it also aligns with something science has quietly confirmed. Human thought is contagious. Emotion is contagious. A smile, a shiver, a rumour, an image, all can travel from person to person, shaping our inner weather. Dreams are no exception. If you tell someone about a nightmare, there's a small chance it will echo in their mind, planting the seed for a similar dream. The story of this man wasn't so different. It was a viral dream, spread not through sleep but through attention. In the end, Nutella's experiment accomplished something rare. It turned a hoax into a meditation on belief. He showed that fear and wonder share the same root: curiosity. When faced with the unknown, we reach for meaning, even if we have to invent it. And in doing so, we reveal how powerful imagination truly is. The story fooled the world not because it was malicious, but because it was believable. Not in the way that facts are believable, but in the way that dreams are. They feel true while you're in them, and even after you wake, a piece of that truth lingers. If you look at the sketch now, knowing what it really was, it feels different, smaller maybe, or perhaps sadder. The face no longer carries the weight of myth, yet it still looks back at you with quiet persistence. Because even stripped of its story, it remains what it always was, a reminder of the mind's endless capacity to imagine connection. A few pencil strokes, and the world found itself dreaming together, and that perhaps is the real lesson. We are pattern-seeking creatures living in a patterned universe. We see constellations in stars that have never met, stories in faces that never existed. But these patterns are not mistakes, they're how we make sense of the dark. This man taught us that truth doesn't always live in the evidence. Sometimes it lives in the act of looking. As we leave his gaze behind, the story widens again. Long before the internet, long before posters and pixels, people dreamed of faces that seemed to carry messages from somewhere beyond. Dreams that warned of danger, that foretold tragedy, that seemed to glimpse the future. Those stories, older than language itself, belong to the next part of our journey, where imagination meets belief and coincidence becomes prophecy. Every once in a while, you wake with the strange conviction that you've already lived a moment that hasn't yet happened. A hallway, a face, A sentence spoken in exactly the same tone you just heard it whispered in sleep. At first, it feels like coincidence, the brain's way of tidying fragments of memory. But the feeling lingers, like the echo of a bell you can't quite locate. You wonder if it's possible that the mind, in its nightly wanderings, sometimes walks a little ahead of time. The idea isn't new. Long before psychology or neuroscience existed, people believed that dreams could pierce the veil of tomorrow. In the ancient cities of Mesopotamia, dream interpreters served kings the way astronomers once served sailors. They read the symbols of the night sky within the mind. A lion meant victory, a flood meant warning, a tree meant birth or loss. In Egypt, a dream was considered a letter from the gods. The priests kept dream books, catalogues of symbols and their meanings. To dream of water was fortune. To dream of darkness was a sign to stay home. People slept in temples, hoping to receive messages that would guide them through waking life. Centuries later, the Greeks took this faith and refined it into ritual. Those who were sick would visit the temple of Asclepius, god of healing, and spend the night on a sacred bed, waiting for a dream that would show them a cure. When they woke, the priests would interpret it. A snake coiled on the chest meant the body would soon renew itself. A bright light meant recovery was near. For thousands of years, humanity believed that sleep was a bridge, not just to rest, but to revelation. Even now, in a world of satellites and algorithms, the belief hasn't vanished. It has only changed form. You can find endless accounts, in diaries, in interviews, online, of dreams that seem to predict events. Abraham Lincoln once told his wife of dreaming that he walked through the White House, hearing sobs from unseen mourners. When he reached the East Room, he saw a coffin draped in black. Inside was his own body. Days later, he was assassinated. Mark Twain dreamed of his brother Henry's funeral. The same coffin, the same flowers, the same clothes, only for the dream to unfold in reality soon after. The Titanic too had its share of prophecies. Dozens of people reportedly dreamed of drowning ships before the great vessel ever left port. One British psychic, William Stead, even wrote a fictional story 2 years before the disaster about a luxury liner sinking after hitting an iceberg. A story so eerily accurate that his name appeared in newspapers again when he died aboard the Titanic. Skeptics argue that these tales survive not because they prove foresight, but because of how memory works. The mind dreams thousands of times each year, most of which vanish upon waking. When something happens that resembles one of those forgotten dreams, we remember only that one, as though the dream had predicted it. Psychologists call this selective recall, but you don't need the term to understand it. The brain, ever hungry for meaning, collects coincidences the way children collect seashells, keeping the pretty ones, letting the rest wash away. Yet there's another truth, softer but harder to dismiss. Prophetic dreams endure because they comfort us. They suggest that chaos might have a pattern, that life isn't entirely random. When tragedy strikes, it helps to think that somewhere, someone sensed it coming, that the universe whispered a warning, even if we couldn't hear it in time. Belief, in that sense, is a form of tenderness. It's a way of giving meaning to what otherwise feels meaningless. Science has tried gently to understand. Experiments have shown that the dreaming brain is skilled at pattern recognition. It picks up small cues, a shift in weather, a tone in a loved one's voice, a memory of a distant news story, and stitches them into symbols. A person who dreams of a plane crash might have read an article about aviation the day before, or overheard someone mention turbulence. The brain stores these details invisibly, like seeds, and then lets them bloom in sleep. When a crash later occurs somewhere in the world, the coincidence feels impossible. Yet it was simply the brain's sensitivity to patterns, amplified in the fertile soil of imagination. Still, some coincidences remain hard to explain. There are moments when even scientists hesitate, when the details line up too neatly. A mother dreams that her son calls for help, wakes, and finds that he had indeed phoned her moments earlier from an accident. A stranger dreams of an earthquake and feels the floor tremble the next day. Maybe these are flukes, or maybe they're reminders that human intuition, that subtle animal sense of connection, can sometimes read the air before logic catches up. And perhaps that's all prophetic dreaming really is. Intuition translated into story. The body knows before the mind knows, and the dream gives that knowing a stage. It wraps instincts and unseen perceptions into a narrative that makes emotional sense. When the event finally occurs, we remember the dream as a message from the future, when in truth, it was a message from ourselves. It's a lovely paradox that imagination can imitate prophecy so convincingly. The brain, after all, doesn't think in time the way clocks do. To the mind, yesterday and tomorrow are neighbouring rooms, separated only by a thin wall. Dreaming may simply be when that wall becomes translucent. Across centuries, what remains constant isn't the evidence of prophecy, but the yearning for it. We want to believe that the unknown can sometimes be softened by warning, that fate occasionally sends us a note in advance. And maybe, in a way, it does. Not to change destiny, but to remind us that awareness itself is a kind of power, because sometimes, whether by chance or intuition, a dream truly does seem to echo what's coming. And in one small Welsh village, that echo became impossible to ignore, a nightmare that would prove heartbreakingly real and would forever change the way people thought about coincidence and foresight. There are a few stories that make you pause, quite like the one that came from the small Welsh village of Aberfan, a place so ordinary, so peaceful, that it might have remained unnoticed by the wider world forever had it not been for what happened on one grey morning in 1966, and for what some people dreamed just before it did. Aberfan lay nestled in the green valleys of South Wales, a mining town surrounded by soft hills and streams. Coal had built its world, the rhythm of the pit, the men who vanished into the earth each dawn and rose again each night. Black dust on their faces, laughter in the pubs, songs in the air. Above the village loomed what the miners called a spoil tip, a mountain of loose coal waste piled high over the years, layer after layer, growing dark and unstable. It had been raining for days, the ground softening under the constant drizzle. On the morning of October 21st, 1966, at precisely 9:15 a.m, the tip gave way. A river of black rock and slurry roared down the hillside. It moved like liquid but struck like stone, swallowing the village's primary school and a row of houses in seconds. The noise was thunderous, a sound that people later described as a sudden tearing of the earth itself. When it stopped, 144 people were dead, 116 of them were children. For days, the miners who had dug those hills spent their time digging again, this time through the debris that had buried their sons and daughters. The town became silent in a way no words could describe, a silence so heavy that even the rain seemed careful not to fall too loudly. And then, in the days that followed, something else began to surface, not from the ground, but from memory. People began to talk about dreams, dozens of them. A teacher who had dreamt of black waves rolling down the mountain. A mother who had seen her home in a vision covered in soot and rubble. And most haunting of all, a 10-year-old girl named Errol May Jones, who told her mother the night before the disaster, "Mummy, I dreamt that the school was gone. Something black came down all over it." Her mother remembered the words hours later, standing among the rescuers, realising that the dreamer described what no one could have known. News of these dreams spread quickly. The stories were reported in newspapers, repeated in living rooms, discussed in the church where the funerals were held. Some dismissed them as coincidence, the mind's desperate way of finding order in chaos. But for others, the dreams felt like proof that something deep within us can sense danger before it comes. It was as though the collective mind of Aberfan had shuddered before the mountain did. whispering warnings through sleep that no one knew how to hear in time. Psychologists later explained the phenomenon gently. The human brain, they said, is always gathering information, even when we're not aware of it. The smell of damp earth, the sound of creaking timbers, the way a hillside looks slightly different after heavy rain. The subconscious notices what the conscious mind ignores. In dreams, those impressions can merge into vivid symbols: black water, collapsing walls, crying children. When disaster follows, we remember the dreamer's prophecy. But before, it was only the brain's quiet alarm, ringing in symbols instead of words. Yet to the people of Aberfan, that explanation offered little comfort, because what mattered wasn't whether the dreams were supernatural, it was that they existed at all. They were a reflection of the same helpless intuition everyone in the village felt but couldn't name, a heaviness in the air, a sense that the mountain was restless. The dreams became part of the collective mourning, proof that grief and guilt can reach backward through time, rewriting memory until it feels like warning. In the months after the tragedy, the story reached a man named Dr. John Barker, a psychiatrist from Shropshire. Barker had long been fascinated by the connection between emotion and physical health, by the way fear or shock could change the body. When he heard about Aberfan, he wondered if the mind could sometimes sense catastrophe before it arrived, not through magic, but through an as-yet unmeasured kind of awareness. He began collecting reports, visiting the towns, speaking to families, noting their descriptions carefully. Some had dreamed of dark clouds, others of children trapped or crying. There were too many for him to ignore. What struck Barker most was the calmness with which people described their dreams. They didn't speak like prophets. They spoke like parents, neighbours, friends. They weren't trying to prove anything. They were trying to understand. And Barker, moved by that sincerity, began to consider a daring idea. What if these warnings could be gathered, studied, and compared? What if there were a way to listen to dreams before tragedy struck? In that idea lay both compassion and hubris. The scientist in him wanted to measure what grief had already made sacred. He imagined a system, a quiet network of watchers who could note dreams that carried danger, sift through them, and perhaps one day prevent another Aberfan. He called it, simply, the Premonitions Project. It would grow soon into something larger, a bureau devoted to listening to the whispers of the sleeping mind. But before that bureau began, the Aberfan dreams remained what they always were, fragments of feeling stitched into symbols by the imagination, recorded too late to save anyone. Still, they changed the way people thought about coincidence. They reminded the world that whether or not dreams can predict the future, they can certainly make us wish they could. In every culture, there comes a moment when tragedy demands meaning. For Aberfan, that meaning arrived in the form of dreams, a belief that maybe, if we'd listened more closely, the children would still be alive. It wasn't superstition, it was love, reaching backward through time, searching for a way to undo what time had done. When the rescue teams left and the village returned to its uneasy quiet, the dreams continued. Not prophetic anymore, but grieving. Parents saw their children in sleep, alive and laughing before waking to silence. Miners saw the hillside whole again, the school rebuilt, the sky finally clear. Dreams that once seemed warnings had become farewells, and yet their existence inspired one man to try to listen to the next warning before it was too late. That man was Dr. Barker, the quiet observer who would turn tragedy into inquiry. He would collect the dreams of strangers and try to find patterns in the chaos of coincidence. His story would unfold in London, far from Aberfan's misty hills, but haunted by the same question: can the future ever truly speak through sleep? When Dr. John Barker read about Aberfan, he couldn't shake the feeling that something rare had brushed past human understanding, as if the mind, in some quiet and ancient way, had tried to speak before the world was ready to listen. He wasn't a mystic or a prophet. He was a psychiatrist trained in medicine and reason. But reason, he knew, had its limits. It could measure brain waves, chart emotion, trace chemical pathways, and still miss the trembling sense that life occasionally hints at what's coming. After Aberfan, Barker began to imagine what might happen if we didn't ignore those hints. What if there were a way to record them before they faded into memory? What if dreams could be gathered and studied, not as superstition, but as data? Small, fragile pieces of the same puzzle. He knew how impossible that sounded, even to himself. Yet he also knew that disbelief had done little to protect the children of Aberfan. He started quietly. In early 1967, Barker met with a journalist named Peter Fairley, the science correspondent for the Evening Standard. Fairley was curious, open-minded, and, crucially, had access to a wide audience. Together they decided to test an idea that hovered between psychology and folklore. They placed a notice in the paper asking for readers to send in any dreams or premonitions that seemed to predict real events. They called it the Premonitions Bureau. At first, the letters trickled in, polite, hesitant, a few sentences scribbled in uncertain handwriting. But soon, the trickle became a flood. Within weeks, the Bureau had hundreds of reports. Dreams of plane crashes, fires, assassinations, lost ships, collapsing bridges. Many were vague, impossible to verify. Others contained eerie specifics, dates, locations, even the names of people not yet lost. Some writers were frightened by what they saw. Others spoke with calm certainty, as though warning was simply their role in the great mechanism of fate. Among these dreamers, a few stood out. One was Kathleen Middleton, a woman from London who claimed to experience visions during sudden, intense headaches. She described disasters that hadn't yet occurred, and on several occasions they seemed to match events that later appeared in the news. Another was Alan Hencher, a telephone operator with a nervous disposition but a remarkable record. He had written to the Bureau predicting train crashes with uncanny accuracy, sometimes within hours of their occurrence. Barker and Fairley kept meticulous notes. They logged every letter, every date, every detail, and compared them to actual events. The process was both scientific and strangely devotional, a ritual of reading, cross-checking, waiting. For each tragedy that matched a prediction, Barker felt both awe and unease. Awe at the possibility that the human mind could reach beyond its own moment. Unease at what that might mean, that every disaster could have been whispered in someone's dream, unheard. The Bureau became a quiet collaboration between skepticism and hope. Barker wanted to believe there was a pattern, that if they could collect enough evidence, they might someday predict catastrophe before it happened. Fairley, the journalist, believed too, but perhaps more in the story than in the science. Still, they worked together, two men watching the post pile up with both excitement and dread. And then something happened that blurred the line between study and story. In 1968, Alan Hencher contacted Barker with a message that unsettled even him. He said he'd had a vivid premonition, not of a crash or a fire, but of Barker himself. "You'll die soon," Hencher told him softly, "of a stroke or a heart attack." Barker, though shaken, wrote it down like any other case file. Days later, he suffered a heart attack and died. He was 44. The Bureau closed not long after. Without Barker's curiosity to guide it, the files lost their pulse. Fairley wrote a few articles, but public interest drifted elsewhere. The world returned to its usual rhythm of cause and effect. Yet the idea of the Bureau, that someone somewhere might be dreaming of tomorrow's headlines, never fully disappeared. Today, the story feels like something between science and folklore, a study that became a myth that became a mirror. What Barker really discovered wasn't proof of prophecy, but the depth of our longing to believe that life makes patterns even in chaos. People sent their dreams not to show off, but to be heard, to feel that their fears and flashes of intuition mattered. The Bureau became less a laboratory and more a confession booth for the collective unconscious. Looking back, you can see both the elegance and the futility of Barker's experiment. The data could never be clean, the timing never exact. Dreams are slippery by nature, shifting, merging, shaped by emotion as much as by perception. But the human need beneath them was real. The letter spoke of loneliness, of connection, of wanting to prevent suffering. Even when nothing could be verified, the act of writing a dream down made people feel less helpless. Perhaps that was Barker's quietest success. He gave meaning to the private language of fear, and still, the coincidences remain. Some of the Bureau's records align too neatly to dismiss dreams that describe the Aberfan collapse before news broke, or the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy days in advance. Skeptics remind us that prediction only looks clear in hindsight, that hundreds of false alarms accompanied every accurate one, but that too is human. We notice the hits and forget the misses, because memory is not a ledger, it's a story we keep rewriting until it makes sense. If Barker were alive today, perhaps he'd admit that he wasn't searching for evidence of the supernatural at all. He was studying faith, the quiet belief that the mind might sense what logic cannot. In a world of accidents, it's comforting to imagine that something inside us still listens to the ripples of what's coming. The Bureau may be gone, but its spirit lingers. Scientists still study coincidence and intuition. Statisticians still calculate probabilities. Yet somewhere in between, in the unmeasurable space between heartbeats, people still wake from dreams that seem too precise to dismiss. They check the news. They call their loved ones. They whisper a small prayer into the morning air just in case. And maybe that's what Barker's Bureau really achieved. Not prediction, but compassion. It taught us that even in the absence of proof, it's worth paying attention to what our minds are trying to tell us. Whether or not dreams can see the future, they remind us that awareness itself is a kind of safety, a light flickering against the unknown. Our quiet exploration now turns to why such stories persist, why the mind clings to meaning, even when coincidence is enough. Because perhaps in the end, belief is its own kind of dream, one we keep dreaming together, night after night, in the hope that it might one day come true. Sometimes, two moments in life touch so neatly that it feels impossible they weren't meant to meet. You dream of rain, and the next morning, the sky opens in exactly the same way. You think of an old friend and the phone rings with their name on it. You wake from a nightmare about a crash, and that evening the news shows twisted metal and flashing lights. When it happens, you can't help but wonder, did I somehow know? Or is the universe simply whispering in a language I don't yet understand? The truth, perhaps, is both simpler and stranger. The mind is a weaver, not a machine. It doesn't store life as data. It spins it into patterns. And when those threads cross in a way that feels meaningful, we call it coincidence. But for the brain, coincidence isn't random noise, it's fuel. Every connection feels like discovery, every overlap like a secret clue in a puzzle we've been solving all our lives. In psychological language, softened into something friendlier, this tendency is sometimes called confirmation bias, though the phrase feels far too clinical for what it really is. What it means is that we remember what agrees with our expectations and quietly forget what doesn't. The mind is a storyteller, editing its own script as it goes. Out of 1,000 forgotten dreams, we recall the single one that fits tomorrow's events. Out of 1,000 numbers flashing past our eyes, we pause on 1111, or a birthday, or an anniversary, because they feel like they're speaking directly to us. It isn't deception, it's affection. The mind loves pattern the way the heart loves rhythm. We arrange stars into constellations because we cannot bear an empty sky. We turn the random into story because story gives us comfort, and comfort gives us meaning. Think of how often this happens in small, harmless ways. You hum a song you haven't heard in years, and a moment later it begins playing in a cafe. You dream of an ocean, then find an old photograph of the sea the next morning. You remember someone's laugh just before walking past a stranger who sounds exactly like them. None of these things are extraordinary by themselves, but to the mind they shimmer with possibility. For a brief moment it feels as though the world is nodding back, saying, "Yes, I'm listening too." It's easy to understand why we attach such weight to these moments. They puncture the monotony of time. They make the universe feel alive, not indifferent. But when scientists look at the same phenomena, they see a quieter beauty, the beauty of probability. Life is full of billions of moments, billions of dreams, billions of random overlaps. Some of them inevitably will align. The extraordinary thing isn't that coincidences happen, it's that they happen so often and still feel like miracles each time. If we translated this idea into imagery, we might imagine the universe as a vast choir humming 1,000 melodies at once. Every so often, by pure chance, 2 notes resonate perfectly. That resonance feels intentional, but it's really the music of complexity. Coincidence is the universe's background harmony. We only notice it when it matches the song we were already humming. Memory deepens the illusion. Each time we recall an event, we don't play it back like a recording. We rewrite it ever so slightly in the ink of the present. That's why dreams that seemed vague at first can later feel astonishingly precise. We remember them not as they were, but as we now wish them to be. Trimmed, tinted, aligned with what actually happened. Memory is not a ledger, it's a painter, adding colour to make the picture complete. And yet, there's something tender in this tendency. To see meaning in coincidence is not foolishness. It's hope wearing the costume of logic. It's our way of reassuring ourselves that chaos still has rhythm, that our lives are not merely a series of accidents, but verses in a song. When we connect one event to another, a dream to a disaster, a thought to a phone call, a number to a wish, what we're really connecting is ourselves to the world. We're saying I'm part of this and it's part of me. You can see this longing even in science. Statisticians study patterns in data. Physicists search for symmetry in equations. The human desire for order is not confined to superstition. It's the same force that leads us to create music, to tell stories, to fall in love. We want things to fit. We crave coherence the way a plant craves sunlight. Sometimes, of course, that craving goes too far. We might see patterns where none exist, faces in clouds, omens in coincidences. But even that has its gentleness. It's the mind's way of making a vast, uncertain world feel familiar. Pattern seeking is a form of self-soothing, a lullaby we hum to ourselves against the dark. The trick, perhaps, is not to stop seeing patterns, but to hold them lightly, to admire the coincidence without mistaking it for a promise. The dream that mirrors tomorrow may not foretell it. It may simply reveal how deeply connected we already are to everything around us. When something happens that feels preordained, maybe it's not destiny, maybe it's recognition, the world reflecting a thought you'd already begun to form. Think of coincidence as conversation. The universe speaks in probability. We answer with imagination. When those two voices harmonize, the result is meaning. Fragile, fleeting, but real in the moment. If you were to ask why this matters, the answer is simple. Because meaning heals, it steadies us. When we notice alignment, even if it's random, it reminds us that we are capable of wonder. That capacity is what turns data into poetry, memory into story, and sleep into dreaming. So the next time a coincidence finds you, a word overheard, a name repeated, a sign appearing at just the right moment, you can smile without needing to explain it. You don't have to choose between reason and magic. Both are just ways of saying you were paying attention. Our quiet exploration now turns to the gentler side of this same mystery, The way ideas and beliefs themselves can plant seeds in the dreaming mind, shaping what we see before we ever close our eyes. If coincidence is the echo, suggestion is the whisper that starts the song. Sometimes, all it takes is an idea planted gently in the mind, and the imagination does the rest. You read a story about a mysterious face seen in dreams, and that night he appears behind your eyelids. You're told that a hotel is haunted, and suddenly every creak in the hallway sounds like footsteps. You watch someone yawn, and you feel your own jaw stretch in answer. Suggestion isn't trickery, it's connection. It's the way the human mind listens, not just to the world, but to itself. We like to believe that we're in full control of what we think and feel, but much of the mind works like a garden that tends itself. Thoughts drift in like seeds carried by the wind. Some take root, others fade. Suggestion is one of those winds, invisible, soft, but capable of shaping what grows. When someone tells you something vividly enough, your brain begins to imagine it, and imagination to the brain is almost indistinguishable from reality. That's why reading about a meal can make you hungry, or seeing someone blush can warm your own cheeks. The mind rehearses what it witnesses, and soon the rehearsal becomes the experience. In scientific terms, softened into gentler language, this is the same principle that underlies hypnosis and the placebo effect. Belief changes perception, perception changes the body. Tell someone a pill will calm them, and their pulse will slow even if the pill is sugar. Tell a child a story about bravery, and their small heart will thump with real courage. Tell yourself before sleep that you will remember your dreams, and often you do. The mind listens even when it pretends not to. It's why the "this man" phenomenon spread so easily. Once people heard that others had dreamed of him, their own minds began to prepare the stage. The face was described, the emotion was seeded, and the brain, that perfect storyteller, obliged. When night came, it conjured the image, testing it like a scene in a play. Suggestion isn't about weakness, it's about creativity. The same mechanism that makes you dream of a stranger also makes you capable of art, empathy, and invention. We often think of suggestion as something external, a hypnotist's voice, an advertisement, a rumour. But most suggestion begins within. The brain is a narrator that can't help but colour its own story. When you expect to fail, your body tenses and your focus narrows. When you expect kindness, your eyes search for it and often find it. In sleep, the process becomes purer. Without the noise of logic, suggestion becomes direct communication. A single thought before bed, "I will find peace tonight," can ripple through the dream like music under dialogue. The border between imagination and belief is thinner than we think. Consider how easily memory reshapes itself. Tell a story often enough, and the details shift to match the telling. Each recollection is a small act of editing. A brush stroke here, a pause there, until what began as fact becomes feeling. Dream memory works the same way. We rarely recall our dreams exactly as they were. We remember the emotion, then build a story around it that fits who we are when we wake. Over time, suggestion and memory become indistinguishable. A duet, each leading and following the other in perfect rhythm. If we listen to how this works inside the brain, translated softly without jargon, it goes something like this. Every thought leaves a faint imprint, a trail of excitement along tiny bridges between nerve cells. When the same thought repeats, the trail deepens, becoming easier to follow. That's how learning works, and suggestion is simply a form of intentional learning, practicing belief until the body responds as though it were true. This is not delusion, it's the architecture of adaptation. We imagine safety to feel safe. We imagine success to prepare for it. In dreams, suggestion becomes the architect. What you watch, read, or worry about before bed often reappears, rearranged into symbols. Fear becomes a shadowed hallway. Hope becomes a door that finally opens. That's why bedtime rituals matter. The stories we tell ourselves before we sleep become the scaffolding of our dreaming world. The brain keeps working long after you close your eyes, using the materials you leave it. Cultural suggestion works the same way, only larger. Societies pass down shared images, angels, spirits, omens, ghosts, and those ideas nest in generations of dreams. When people across a culture share similar symbols, it isn't proof of the supernatural, it's proof of shared imagination. Our myths are the vocabulary of our collective sleep. If enough people believe that a certain figure appears in dreams, then that belief itself becomes a kind of reality, sustained by attention. The story feeds the dream, and the dream feeds the story, looping endlessly in the human mind. Still, suggestion isn't always manipulation. It can be healing. Therapists use it in gentle forms, guided imagery, affirmations, meditations, to help patients reshape how they see pain, fear, or anxiety. The same mechanism that allows an idea to create discomfort can also create calm. It's the mind's double-edged gift. What we imagine deeply enough begins to influence what we feel. When you picture a peaceful place, your breathing slows. When you remember a moment of safety, your heart steadies. Suggestion is proof that the mind can speak the body's language. This isn't magic. It's a collaboration between belief and biology. The chemistry of comfort, hormones that soften stress, signals that ease muscles, is guided by thought as much as by medicine. If coincidence is the universe's echo, then suggestion is the whisper that starts it. We dream what we expect, and we expect what we dream. And somewhere in that loop lies the reason belief endures even when logic sighs and steps aside. Because deep down, belief feels good. It gives shape to the unknown. It turns chaos into pattern, fear into story, emptiness into connection. When someone tells you that your dream means hope, and you believe it, the feeling itself becomes real. That's not deception. That's the gentle alchemy of the mind turning imagination into comfort. Perhaps this is why, even after centuries of scientific progress, we still make wishes before sleep. We still whisper to the dark, telling it what we want to find. The rational mind knows these are only words, but another part, the dreaming part, listens as though they were commands. And when morning comes and the dream lingers, it feels as though something out there heard you. But maybe, all along, it was you listening to yourself. Our quiet exploration now carries us toward the closing chapter, the still point where science and mystery rest together. Because after all the patterns and paradoxes, what remains is not certainty, but peace, the quiet truth of the night. And so we arrive at the edge of the dream, that soft place where everything we've explored begins to fold back into silence. The mind quiets, the world fades to a hush, and what remains is the gentle rhythm of your own breathing. You've travelled through the machinery of sleep, through nightmares and lucid awakenings, through faces that haunted the collective imagination, and stories that blurred the line between science and superstition. Now, in this stillness, it's time to gather all those scattered pieces and see what they've been trying to tell us all along. Dreams, we've learned, are not random static. They are the echo of the day's noise and the whisper of the mind's deeper voice, woven together into imagery that only makes sense if you stop trying too hard to make sense of it. They rehearse our fears, repair our memories, sort our emotions. They are how the brain cleans itself, not only of information, but of feeling, rinsing the heart as much as the mind. Every night while the body rests, the mind drifts through a quiet workshop where it files, polishes, and occasionally rewrites the story of who we are. When lucidity flickers on, and you become aware within the dream, it is like finding a light in a familiar hallway. You see that the architecture of imagination is built from everything you've ever seen or felt, yet it still surprises you. And when nightmares arrive, bringing darkness and fear, they too serve a purpose. They test your courage in safety, letting the heart practice calm against imagined storms. Even the monsters are teachers, shaped from your own unspoken worries, acting out what words cannot. Then came this man, the phantom face that the world dreamed together. He reminded us of something fundamental, that belief is powerful even when it grows from invention. A single image, a suggestion, can ripple through thousands of minds, each adding their own colour until fiction becomes folklore. But in that process lies a kind of beauty. We discover that imagination is contagious, and that sharing a dream, even an invented one, makes us feel less alone. From there, we drifted into the realm of prophecy, those uncanny dreams that seem to reach beyond time, predicting tragedy or joy. Science tells us that coincidence is inevitable, that our brains notice patterns long after the fact. But emotionally, those stories remind us of something we often forget. We want to care, to notice, to matter. When a dream overlaps with reality, it gives us a reason to believe that life has rhythm, that nothing arrives entirely by accident. And when tragedy struck Aberfan, that belief became a lifeline. Dreams turned into mourning, coincidence into meaning. A child's vision of a black wave became a symbol of all the warnings we fail to hear until it's too late. Through grief, that village taught the world that dreams don't have to be magical to matter. They can simply be the mind's way of saying what the heart already knows. Dr. Barker's bureau was, in the end, not an attempt to control the future, but to listen more closely to the present. It asked a question most scientists avoid. What if imagination holds information we don't yet know how to measure? His files became more than research. They became a record of hope. Each letter was a human voice calling into the dark, saying, "I saw something. Please let it mean something." Even after the bureau closed, its quiet message remained, that curiosity and compassion can exist together, even in the space between sleep and waking. By the time we reached coincidence and suggestion, the boundaries had softened completely. Science and faith, logic and mystery, no longer stood on opposite sides of the room. They were simply two ways of describing the same need, the need to feel connected to the unseen. The mind looks for patterns because it craves understanding. It responds to suggestion because it longs to believe that thought itself can shape reality. And perhaps, in its own small way, it can. If you strip away the formulas, the theories, the probabilities, what you're left with is something disarmingly human. The desire to find meaning in experience. That is the quiet truth of the night. Dreams are not prophecies, but they are honest. They reveal what you feel before you've had the courage to say it aloud. They offer comfort in code, clarity in metaphor, truth disguised as fantasy. They are your private myths, retold every evening by a storyteller who knows you better than anyone else ever will. So when you dream of flying, it isn't about gravity, it's about freedom. When you dream of falling, it isn't about danger, it's about trust. When you dream of being lost, it's because part of you is still searching. Each dream is a mirror, fogged at the edges but faithful at its heart. Science can tell us the mechanism, the flicker of electrical storms between neurons, the shifting rhythm of rapid eye movement, but it can't tell us why a single dream can leave us changed, or healed, or haunted for years. That why is something softer, more personal. It's where curiosity becomes poetry. Maybe that's what this whole journey has been about, learning to listen, not just to the signals of the brain, but to the silence between them. Because when all the data falls away, what remains is the oldest form of wisdom we have, attention. Paying attention to your dreams means paying attention to yourself. It means honouring the part of you that keeps feeling, even while you sleep. If you've stayed with me this far, through all the stories of science and superstition, of patterns and premonitions, then you've done something rare. You've watched your own awareness move gently from curiosity to calm. You've seen that understanding doesn't always mean dissecting. Sometimes it means resting beside mystery and letting it breathe. Now, as the night thins and the first pale light of morning begins to slip through the window, the mind can finally rest. You don't need to solve anything. You don't need to find proof. You can simply exist in the knowing that every dream, every coincidence, every passing image was part of a conversation between you and the universe. A conversation that continues quietly, even now, as you listen. So take a breath. Feel the air move softly in and out. Let your thoughts drift like slow-moving clouds. Somewhere behind them, the same patterns of the day will begin to dissolve into the shapes of tomorrow's dreams. The night will fold itself gently around you once more, and the mind will return to its workshop, to build, to heal, to wander. And before you go, I want to thank you for walking through these quiet hours with me, for letting science become story, and story become rest. Hello there, and thank you for being part of this little corner of the cosmos, a place where curiosity can unwind and knowledge can hum itself into a lullaby. Whether your eyes are still open or already drifting closed, I hope this journey leaves you a little lighter, a little more at peace with the strange wonder of being alive. If you found comfort in these calm explorations, you're always welcome to return, to like, to share, or simply to listen again. There will always be another story waiting, another mystery to unfold softly in the dark. Until then, wherever and whenever you are, may your dreams be kind, your rest deep, and your waking gentle. Sleep peacefully, dear traveller of the mind,